Hard time staying civil in this country. But left hates right and red hates the blue. If you can't be friends with someone who thinks different, then maybe the problem is with
I got to chat with you today, and I'm excited to be with you for one of our premiere episodes of Left, Right, Center. We have Ty Stark, who's our left voice. I try to be more middle but right, and we also have a wonderful guest today, Robyn Abrams, who has incredible experience going to both parties and really being that middle voice. So I just want to, Robyn, if I could turn the floor over to you to introduce yourself, give us some of your history, and then we'll discuss some topics today.
Sure. I'm Robyn Abrams, and I've had the privilege of attending both Republican and Democratic national conventions, which is really quite unusual. So years ago in 1988, I started doing messaging. Sounds silly, but started with buttons, wound up building my business up to working with 43 state parties, and then some of the territories and areas like Guam. It's been fascinating and amazing, and I've gotten to meet political presidential candidates across the spectrum and attended many really unique events. And I love politics. I love the process of having conversations and discussions and listening to people's point of views. And I was really excited when you invited me.
I really enjoy having these conversations, and people always say, oh, you can't talk about, in a public setting, talk about politics, sex, or religion. But they're all three are very fun topics to talk about if people are just civil about it. And it just seems like 10 years ago we could have these conversations and still be friends, and nowadays it's just so polarizing. So the purpose of this show is actually to help us express the different perspectives, try to find some middle ground, and recognize and respect when maybe we aren't in middle ground. But it seems like most progress when you're trying to move forward in the political world is gravitating towards the center. That's where we move forward. Otherwise, we just keep going in opposite directions. And so today we were going to talk about some of the immigration things that are going on in America, and hopefully Ty will jump on here a little later. But we've got immigration things going on. We've got ICE is really cranked up. We've got the fences going up. I understand there's been in 6 months we already have 450 miles of border fence that has been completed. Our border crossings are way down. I hear that there's been over 1 million people that have just left a free choice. Then, of course, the ICE is going around and gathering up what we understand are criminals from one side of news sources. And I understand you listen to multiple sources. And then other sides are saying, oh, they're grabbing children and they're separating families and they're kicking out people that aren't just criminals. I don't know where to go or what sources to believe anymore because it's just our news is so inflammatory everywhere we listen. So what are some of the ones that you listen to? Where do you feel like you find more accurate or neutral sources, Robyn? What are your sources?
Well, first, let me say I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I listened to Fox, I listened to MSNBC, I listened to BBC, I listened to Al Jazeera, I listened to Global Perspectives, the global news networks. I think it's really important that not only do we understand what each other is listening to, but also what's being heard around the world. And when I travel, and I travel quite extensively to other countries, I really like to know what they think of the United States and Americans and our president. And I like that perspective. So I think I probably take a little extreme. I always have TVs going on in the background, and I'm a news junkie. But, let's talk about some topics, and I can tell you what I've heard or what I believe. I'm happy to share that.
Well, on the immigration topic, which seems to be more inflammatory in certain states other than others. And Ty, when we were doing one of our previous episodes, he brought up the points. It seems like most of the cities, the large populations, seem to be more blue, and then the outskirts seem to be more red. And I was watching a video today I sent to him, and maybe I'll play it.
Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates.
Really going more blue, we're going more government control, where red is going less government, more individual, more family, personal responsibility. That's one thing that's out there. But my question with where we're going with immigration is, the problems seem to be in the bigger areas. Well, that can't be right if we got agricultural things. For example, you were saying that, wow, you noticed ICE came into town and was actually going to agricultural places, which we were told they weren't going to do.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective on that with ICE and city versus country?
So I live in a really interesting place. I live in California. We're a border state. We also have red populations and we have blue populations in some of the larger cities. It's really difficult here. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think that we are far from feeling like we have made strides. But I live in an agricultural community, and I can tell you that it is the first time since I have lived here that we don't have crops growing. We do not have workers that are, farming those areas and communities. And it's really sad because nobody else wants the job. And we have workers that are really willing to do work in extraordinarily hot weather. And it's not easy. It's very laborious, and yet they're not there. And we have recently had ICE raids. We have had them come into our communities. I've seen the caravans personally. I have a videotape actually of them coming into town. So our community is suffering economically. We're going to be suffering with, our food supply because we're used to fresh fruits and vegetables that are farmed locally. And then there's a lot of other, jobs that just are not being filled. Restaurants are suffering. They don't have staff for them. So I don't really know where we're going to go with our community. And I'm just giving that perspective from just where I live.
Which is, like you say, it's a border state. It's also a very blue state. So I'm curious how that would compare to, say, a Kansas or a Nebraska or Utah, where I'm at.
Well, the irony is I'm actually in a fairly red community. I mean, this is a valley that's very affluent. So, the flip side is that we have a lot of immigrants and we have a lot of affluent people that live here, and they tend to be much more conservative fiscally. And, a lot of Trump supporters here. I think it was probably a majority of Trump signs versus, Harris signs after Biden dropped out. And so, if you were to gauge that and you were to see the rallies, you would think just the opposite. But I think that there's a lot of people right now that are feeling it. They're business owners, and those business owners tend to lean, further to the right, and they're suffering. So I'm not sure how their perspective is going to change on this, but I do think that change is coming.
Seems like any change is difficult, no matter what we do. And there's always repercussions or secondary ripple effects that are going to affect people. Like, here's our idea, boom. But then there's always these ripple effects or blind spots we didn't see once the ball gets rolling. So I can see there being some problems. I can't help but wonder with California compared to other states because of the riots and the things that's like, look, do peaceful demonstrations, that's fine, but if you get violent, well, then I feel like the hand came in even heavier to like, well, now we're going to do more ICE raids there because you're misbehaving, is what I feel like what happened in California. I could be wrong, but that's the vibe I get.
So the interesting thing is, if you were to look at a map of Los Angeles and you were to look at where the riots were happening, and this is not defending the riots or, supporting them or even, saying that they shouldn't happen, it was a teeny dot in a huge, huge county. And so if it's a square mile or 2 square miles of a vast city, the news continuously covered what was happening. And mind you, I don't ever support violence. I don't believe in those kind of protests. I think that there are much more effective and impactful ways of having a voice. But unfortunately, it became newsworthy, and, the National Guard was sent in, and it became really controversial here. And it wasn't quite as bad as the sound bites and news clips kept playing, but you would know that. And of course, that's the news that we listen to. And when you play it over and over, you believe it. And so, I don't know that it's that bad.
Yeah. It's funny because you watch the news and you see those clips and you think all of California is on fire. And my mom had that. I was serving a Christian mission over in Korea, and back then it was like, Yankee, go home, and they would organize college riots against the police, and it was like a half of a block, and it was very organized, but it looked like the entire South Korea was on fire on the news. Like it was just complete chaos. So what we see versus the reality is so different on the news, and that's why it's so frustrating when our news sources are feeding us different inflammatory information. It's hard for us to make good, healthy decisions as just lay Americans, lay people Americans. Yeah.
It's true.
I know that there's the legislation on how to handle this stuff, and I look at some of the statistics on presidents before and what they were doing with getting illegals out of the country, and they've done way more than Trump, but yet Trump seems to be catching a lot of negative flack with it. And maybe it's the system he's doing. I don't know. It seems like they all have their stuff. It just seems we're all really irritated and easily polarized in the current stuff. Any suggestions with your perspective on both sides on how it's being handled well, or how it can be handled better, or how it's not being handled well?
So first off, I'm a firm believer in having border security. I think that we need to secure our borders. We need to secure our nation. There needs to be a process in place. I'm not sure that the way that this has happened, as quickly, rapidly, and aggressively as this has happened, has been as effective as maybe it could be or should be, because there's so much misunderstanding and fear. People, no matter who you are human, and when you see or hear of family separations, whether that's really happening or not, it tugs at your heartstrings. If you are leaving another country and traveling through unfathomable conditions and trying to get to this country to provide a better life, and let's face it, you come here and it's not a better life necessarily for a lot of these people. I mean, it is terrible to struggle financially and be now in communities where you are ostracized and not respected. You're not considered legal. You don't know what your status is. You live in fear and look over your shoulders. So I think that there needs to be a better process for legal immigration. I think that there needs to be more deployment at the border, and I don't think that necessarily aggressive tactics and holding everybody is the right way. There's a lot of people that, first off, what kind of background checks are we running? What are we doing to really vet the people coming into this country? Because if we were doing a better job, and this was across any president, I mean, this has been a problem that has been ongoing, would we have all of the people admitted to the country at the borders? I'm not sure that we would. So I think that we really do need to take stronger positions and proper vetting. I think that we need to have more counsel available. I mean, you talk about due process. Due process works both ways. We both have different opinions, and I have my own opinion on due process. They vary. I mean, if you were to define that, and I know we had talked about that a little bit, what does that mean to Republicans? What does that mean to Democrats? And what does that mean to the independents? And if we're looking, at midterms, where is that issue sitting? And that is really, really important, because it's not just the politics of it, but what is going to be put in place to enforce and reinforce some really good policies and processes. And I don't know that I'm seeing that quite yet. I do believe that numbers are down. There's no question numbers are down.
Yeah. Numbers are down, and I think that they're doing such aggressive work now trying to clean up what was the pendulum swung way too far with open borders, and now it's swinging way too far with extreme stuff where, again, like we started our conversation, the real success is in the middle, but unfortunately I think they're being reactive now for what happened before. But if we can find good policies, good fences make good neighbors. We need to have solid borders and let people in that are properly vetted, as you pointed out. And I think there's good systems in place. If we look at other countries, though, a lot of countries struggle with this. I too like to travel to other countries and see what they're thinking about what we're doing, looking at their challenges. They've all got challenges with immigration. All of Europe's flooded with immigrants, and they have their struggles. What Portugal, when I was living in Portugal, they had a big influx of illegal immigrants at the time, and the same load on their system that it does for us. If they're working under the table, and now they're going into emergency rooms, they're getting free care while the citizens are paying for it, it really skews the system and makes it top heavy for us citizens, where we're paying more taxes or paying more medical expenses while other people are getting it free because they're cruising under the system, under the radar. So what Portugal did was said, look, if you're here illegally, you're already here. They tried to tighten up their borders, and they said, let's try this. Instead of having a job and the job owner or business owner gets in trouble for hiring illegals, we're going to say, look, why don't you sponsor them? They register with the state, and after that, then they're paying taxes and they're paying into the Social Security and those systems. And after 5 years of having a good record of working a job, paying into the system, and not just taking from the system, then they can get citizenship. And I thought, wow, what a brilliant idea. And I look at that and go, well, why didn't we do that? But I remember that idea in Trump 1.0 going, why weren't we doing this then? I don't know if we could sustain that system with 20 million people that have come over in the last 4 years. I don't know, but it seems like a good model, but I don't know if it'll work under the stress that the country's been under lately.
Right, and I think that moving forward, it's a great concept, but the problem lies with how many people are residing in our country that wouldn't necessarily fall under that. You know, I just got back from China, and last year we were not allowed to discuss politics. Nobody would talk politics. And now it's, you know, the tragedy and comedy. I mean, they look at it, they don't even know because they're scared about what their future coming to the United States for education is. And a lot of our, you know, economy at the universities and in cities that bring in a lot of exchange students from other countries, and they're paying full tuition, they're concerned whether they're going to get their visas and what that's going to look like for them. And they're concerned, and then they laugh and say, well, the tariffs don't affect them, it affects us. And so they don't really know what to make of what's happening politically. And they were all willing to talk about what politics looked like and sounded like, at least from them, mind you, from the news that they are listened to, which is filtered news. So it's not accurate, but it was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, because if they're paying regular fees to come in, they're doing the system right, they're getting their visas, they're following the right steps, and it's a win-win scenario. The tough thing is when we have people coming in illegally in large quantities, the system can only handle so much. And I was just thinking of, I've got people working on our sprinklers right now, and I guess a sprinkler system like a drip system can handle 20 pounds of pressure of water. But imagine you had 1,000 pounds of pressure of water going through. There's just no way the system could handle it, which is where we find ourselves right now. We are a country of immigrants, and immigration is good when it's controlled and we can control that flow. But when it gets out of control, how do we reel back the reins and get control of it again without harm, without collateral damage like we're talking about? Look, if we're just rounding up a bunch of people and kicking them out of the country, are we splitting up families? Are we throwing such a wide net that we're capturing people that have been here 20 years and just been doing their best to try to gain citizenship and try to do it right? I don't know. It's a really tough problem. And that's where, if Ty were here, and I'll speak for him on this one, with his due process, he's all about, hey, look, you eat, drink, and breathe, and you're in this country, the laws apply to you. Where I know on the Republican side, it's like, well, no, these laws and rules apply to citizens, and you're not you didn't have due process coming in, you don't get due process going out. And I mean, both are good arguments. Hey, just to be humane, we should be fair to everybody. Hey, you're here, you're a guest in my house, now I'm gonna, well, I don't know if you're a guest if you weren't invited in, but I don't know.
I believe that there are places that you can start rounding up criminals. We have many, many illegal criminals in our jails. We have people that have been convicted of crimes. When you throw out a wide net, you are getting a lot of people that have no criminal history, that are hardworking, that do support their families, that do, people think that if they're illegal, then they're taking advantage of our system, but they're also spending money in our markets and our local businesses. And, there's a lot of, and our car dealerships and all of the things, the necessities and the needs that a family has while living here is supporting a business. So there are probably, it would be music to people's ears, both Democrats and Republicans, to believe that everybody that was being apprehended was criminal. They have already had their due process. They have already been convicted of crimes, and that would have been a great starting point. But that's not what happened. And so I think that if we all took a step back, what are the goals? I think many of us, no matter who you're affiliated with, want the same thing. We want safety in this country. And the due process part is because we do not have the ability to separate those that some people feel wouldn't deserve due process and those that do. Because there are many people that really shouldn't have been put in this position. But I think that there's other places that can be started, and I think nobody would disagree that we want this country safer and we want less criminals. And it costs us a fortune to hold and house these people.
That's for sure. I hear it's around $49,000 a year just for each inmate that's in prison that we're trying to support and sustain. So it's a tough problem. It's a big problem, and I'm glad we have people that are elected to try to help with those problems, and I hope that they're listening to the voices of people in their constituents in their community to try to make good choices. But boy, as just a little person in a little community, I look at it and go, this is just a problem that's just, I just don't know how to fix it at this point with how big it is. So I appreciate your calm and collected perspectives on trying to find a medium, a middle ground there. I know that Ty also likes to talk, he also brings up, besides due process, he'll bring up the rule of law. And it's interesting with the rule of law how sometimes it seems to change with whoever's in office. I find that if we had a pillar in the middle of the room and it's, a third of it's painted red, white, and blue, depending on where we're standing, we can all agree, hey, it's a pillar in the middle of the room. But one person say it's blue, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's red from where I'm looking at it, or it's white, or whatever. And that's where I think the trouble is with our laws and with our perspective on some of these things is we're all looking at the same thing, but because our angle is different, we really are not looking at the same problem. And it's hard for all of us to. I love how you do it, where you look at different news sources. You're looking at different information to try to get more of a three-dimensional perspective on that, which I wish more of us did that in America, because it's hard to find good sources of information.
I think that one of the reasons that people liked Ronald Reagan so much was because he had this beautiful way of talking about America, and it was the shining city on a hill. And what did that stand for? It stood for hope and freedom, and we were a beacon of the world. And there was a time that we were red, white, and blue and we were all Americans. And now we don't really look at each other that way. And that is so sad. I mean, I wore white, you're wearing blue. I thought you would be wearing red, but but the reality is that I loved that time. And I also loved the time where the ideology of each party was understood. It was with passion and purpose. It has evolved so much that I'm not even sure and clear what Republican and Democratic ideals are and values. I think that, you look at who was just nominated as the candidate in New York, and a socialist was a little far left than most people would have ever imagined running a city like New York. So I think that what's happening is that we don't even have a grasp anymore what politics looks like, what ideology looks like. People sort of looked at, and it started with the Tea Party. It really did. It separated itself out from Republicans. Then there was the Libertarians, and there's, MAGA supporters. It never was defined so separately before. It was just all part of a party. So everybody now, stands differently and stands firm on how far or extreme their beliefs are. And I don't really know that people look at it as Democrats and Republicans anymore.
Yeah, it's really lost its way on that, and it seems like we really anchor to certain vocabulary where it sounds like we're speaking the same language, but we have different definitions for the same words nowadays. And so it's like, how we're not speaking the same language, so how are we supposed to communicate and find? So then I think that's a key part of that polarization. That
I know, Republicans were, law and order, and now Democrats say they're law and order, and really, who's law and order? Who supports the blue? And men and women in uniform and everything in between in uniform. I think that the talking points now, the positioning and the posture has changed immensely. And it was never like that. It was always very, very, very clear.
Yeah. The confusion of our current day. Well, hopefully this helps. I wish Ty was on here. Hopefully he'll be on the next episode. I'll go ahead and...
Today's show is brought to you in part by EnergyBits.com, Earth's original whole food source and energy source. It's not a supplement. It's a whole food. Discount code Dr. J.
But hopefully this gives you a little flavor of where we're trying to go with Left, Right, Center as we try to discuss different sides of political thinking, find some common ground, maybe find some answers from us, the people that are supposed to be the ones who decide what our government does. Hopefully we can give good feedback up the flagpole to the right people to help resolve issues, find peace and safety in our country, and just be happy and love America. God bless America.
Civil in this country. When left hates right and red hates the blue. If you can't be friends with someone who thinks different, then maybe the problem is with you. And I won't piss on your shoes if you won't piss on mine. Keep it in your own lane and we'll get along just fine. You don't have to share my opinions to be a friend of mine. So I won't piss on your shoes, buddy, if you won't piss on mine.